Welcome back to Comm 101. First and foremost, very good news. She Does It Live was able to make our donation to the Library of Congress. The link was not working a couple of weeks ago. It seems to be back up and running. So if you are able to, I encourage you to do the same. Obviously, they are in need of our help, as are all libraries. Okay, so this week we're going to talk about self-proclaimed dog shooter and Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Last Tuesday, while testifying before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee about the DHS's budget for fiscal year 2026, Kristi Noem was asked by Senator Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire to define habeas corpus. And honestly, if you have not watched the clip of her answering this question, pause me and go watch it. I'll wait. It's hysterical. Okay, so honestly, I thought we all learned about habeas corpus in 4th grade, but apparently not Kristi Noem. She incorrectly stated that habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from the country. No. Article 1, Section 9, Paragraph 2 of the U.S. Constitution. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion the public safety may require it. Okay, so first let's break this down with a little help from our friends at Merriam-Webster's dictionary, because not a whole lot of us speak Latin these days. The literal translation of habeas corpus means you should have the body. But in essence, the paragraph means the judge or court should and must have any person who's being detained brought forward so that the legality of the person's detention can be assessed. This is referred to as the Great Writ. And it's not at all about guilt or innocence of the person, but is in fact about whether the person in custody is being detained lawfully. So it's about due process. And this is about all persons on U.S. soil, not just U.S. citizens. So the reason I say that we learned this in the 4th grade, because I thought anyway, very well known that President Lincoln suspended habeas corpus during the Civil War in 1861. He argued that it was necessary to protect the Union from sabotage by Confederate sympathizers. But the Supreme Court actually ruled that he lacked the authority to do this. Why, you might ask? Well, in part, anyway, because Article 1 of the Constitution is about the legislative branch, which the president is not a part of. Later in 1863, Congress, the legislative branch, did in fact formalize Lincoln's suspension. It was like the Habeas Corpus Suspension Act. Fine. Another notable suspension, fans of the greatest television show to ever air will recall Season 5, Episode 7, as the West Wing tried to find its footing in a post-Sorkin world. We fade up. The clerks of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court debating Korematsu. Korematsu versus the U.S. occurred when Fred Korematsu, a 23-year-old Japanese American, would not comply with an order to leave his home and job and report to a detention camp. Okay, so 10 weeks after the U.S. entered World War II, Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which removed people of Japanese ancestry from what the government designated as military areas and the surrounding communities in the United States. It was a mass relocation of more than 120,000 Japanese people to detention camps, 2/3 of whom were U.S. citizens. This case was, again, at least in part controversial because it was an executive order, not an act of Congress. Congress being the legislative branch, Article 1 being about the legislative branch, and thus habeas corpus falling under the direction of Congress. Now, I can't really speak to Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus, but history has not looked kindly on FDR's. In fact, it's arguably one of the few criticisms of his 4 terms in office, especially since it paralleled what we were fighting against in World War II in Europe, the mass deportation of a subgroup of people. And it was blatantly racist. We weren't moving those people with heritage from the other Axis powers, German or Italian Americans, to detention camps for worry of treachery or sabotage. Only those who were easily identifiable because they looked different. Anyway, it would probably be best if we didn't have a dog shooting woman with a 3rd grade education in charge of Homeland Security. Catch you next time on Comm 101.